The Great Society asks not how much, but how good. Not only how to create wealth, but how to use it. Not only how fast we're going, but where we're headed. It proposes as the first test for a nation the quality of its people. This kind of society will not flower spontaneously from swelling riches and surging power. It will not be the gift of government or the creation of presidents. It will require of every American for many generations both faith in the destination and the fortitude to make the journey. And like freedom itself, it will always be challenge and not fulfillment. And tonight, we accept that challenge. I propose that we begin a program in education to ensure every American child the fullest development of his mind and skills. I propose that we begin a massive attack on crippling and killing diseases. I propose that we launch a national effort to make the American city a better and a more stimulating place to live.
Yes, we are back. Hope you enjoyed the sunrise. It is 7:38 in the PM here on Friday, May the 24th, 2024. That voice you heard in the intro is one Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, why start the segment with Lyndon Baines Johnson? Well, this is the 60th anniversary this week of Lyndon Johnson launching his Great Society program. You know, a lot of you may remember I was not born at the time. That's a little bit before my time. But I have read a great deal about the Great Society over the years. And it just really reiterates to me what I talk about on this show very often, which is that our modern politicians aren't worth a damn. Because Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program was the goal was the total elimination of poverty and racial injustice. It's incredible now to look back at it and think of how much was accomplished by this program. There were new major federal programs that focused on civil rights, education, medical care, urban sprawl, rural poverty. He didn't feel like he had to choose between the urban and the rural. He thought poverty itself has to be eliminated, and even transportation. They really did a good job of filling out the highway system that was started under Eisenhower in the 50s. This program was obviously promoted by LBJ and the Democrats when they actually were good back in the 1960s. It was almost like the fulfilling the promise of Roosevelt's New Deal domestic agenda. Now, the most famous feature of the Great Society was the war on poverty, which is the type of things that you wage war on when you have a functional society. The federal government raised the minimum wage. They enacted programs to train poor people for new and better jobs, including the 1964 Manpower Development and Training Act and the Economic Opportunity Act, which established such programs as Job Corps. I always hear a lot of older cats talk about Job Corps. What happened to that? And the Neighborhood Youth Corps To assure adequate housing, in 1966, Congress adopted the Model Cities Act to attack urban blight and set up cabinet level departments of housing and urban development, and began a program of rent supplements for the poor. They passed the Higher Education Act in 1965 to provide student loans and scholarships. The Elementary and Secondary Schools Act of 1965 to pay for textbooks. And the Educational Opportunities Act of 1968 to help poor people be able to afford prenatal and postnatal care. You got the Medicaid Act of 1968 that paid for the medical expenses of poor people, and Medicare was established in 1965 that extended medical insurance to older Americans under the Social Security system. These are the type of things that are possible, folks, when your country isn't bombing 7 and 8 countries at once, at all times, when they're not sending billions to Israel to help colonize the Palestinians' land, or sending money to Ukrainian Nazis. Just because we want to weaken Russia, because we don't like the idea of a multipolar world where we have to share power with Russia and China as opposed to dominating the entire world by ourselves. These are the types of things you can have. These are the things that other countries have. Much of Western Europe and the more progressive countries in Asia, like Japan, have a lot of programs just like this. That's why they don't have the murder rates of Gary and Chicago. They don't have intergenerational poverty, 7 and 8 generations of people living in the projects, or in Appalachia somewhere with no indoor plumbing. That is embarrassing for the richest country in the history of the world. And LBJ actually got that and did something about it. LBJ also prodded Congress to pass a broad spectrum of civil rights laws that range from the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Act of 1968, that barred discrimination in the sale or renting of housing. In 1965, LBJ issued an executive order requiring government contractors to ensure that job applicants and employees were not discriminated against. It required all contractors to prepare an affirmative action plan to achieve these goals. He did it with an executive order. Those things that people told me Obama couldn't do, or that Joe Biden can't do. LBJ did it. And you tell me I can't let Trump be president again because Trump might do it. But the guys you like can't do it. Come on. Stop the nonsense. He also broke many other color barriers. In 1966, he named the first black cabinet member and appointed the first black woman to the federal bench. In 1967, he appointed Thurgood Marshall to become the first black American to serve on the Supreme Court, the first Southerner to reside in the White House in half a century. This man showed a stronger commitment to improving the position of black Americans than any previous president. And apparently any president since, including the black one, who's just happy having his wine and cheese parties in the Hamptons with his rich friends Bruce Springsteen and Richard Branson, while Chicago and Gary and all these other cities devolve. But hey, at least Obama sent $38 billion to Israel, right? That was money well spent, wasn't it? When President Johnson announced his Great Society programs in 1964, he promised substantial reductions in the number of Americans living in poverty. And what do you think happened? He succeeded. He did. Actually, using your power as the president of the United States, as the president, to improve people's lives worked. When he left office, he promised, he could legitimately say that he had delivered on the promise of cutting poverty. In 1960, 40 million Americans, which was 20% of the population, were classified as poor. By 1969, that number had fallen to 24 million. That's 12% of the population. He also pledged to qualify the poor for new and better jobs, to extend health insurance to the poor and the elderly, to cover hospital and doctors' costs, and to provide better housing for low-income families. He delivered. Infant mortality amongst the poor, which barely declined between 1950 and 1965, fell by 1/3 in the decade after 1965 as a result of expanded federal medical and nutritional programs. You see what happens when, you know, your elected officials actually give a damn? Yeah. Before 1965, 20% of the poor had never seen a doctor. Good God. I got to read that again. Before 1965, 20% of poor people in America had never seen a doctor. That is incredible. By 1970, that number had been cut to 8%. So he just slashed that in half. The proportion of families living in houses lacking indoor plumbing also declined steeply from 20% of families living in houses without indoor plumbing to just 11% by 1970. Whew. Man, during the 1960s, the median black family income rose 53%. Think about that. During the 1960s, the median black family income rose 53%. Black employment in professional, technical, and clerical occupations doubled. The average black educational attainment increased by 4 years. Think about that. The average black educational attainment increased in just 4 years. The proportion of black people below the poverty line fell from 55% in 1960 to just 27% by 1968. So in just 8 years, we went from 55% of black people being poor to under 30%. That's slashed it in half in 8 years. You still don't think that presidents are responsible for anything? That we can't hold these people accountable? You see why I vote third party, why I don't support any of these people? Where's Joe Biden doing any of this? He ain't doing none of this. The black unemployment rate fell by 34%. 34%. The country had taken many, many strides toward extending equality of opportunity towards black folks. But in addition, the number of white people in poverty also dropped dramatically. So it wasn't just like, oh, he only did for this one group. No, he took poverty seriously. Now, obviously, the middle of the 20th century was prosperous for America for many reasons. World War II had destroyed much of Western Europe and Japan. We know that. But also, the government actually did its job for once. And because of that, we saw the greatest increase in standards of living in American history. And so when you see a lot of people are cynical. I talked to some of you a lot of times these weeks. A lot of you people are very cynical. You seem to be very cynical about what is possible for politicians to do. What is impossible for this guy to do? What is impossible for that guy to do? The last two presidents that we had that got 90% of the black vote, Joe Biden and Barack Obama, both of these guys entered the White House. They had the House, the Senate, the White House. Even if it wasn't by, Biden didn't have it by large margins, but he had it by enough to do a lot of things he wanted, if he wanted to do them. Barack Obama entered the White House. He had the largest majority in Congress that any Democrat had had in 75 years and squandered it. Didn't say anything about universal health care. Did not codify Roe v. Wade in the law, which liberals claim is the most important issue in the history of the world. Didn't fight to raise the minimum wage by any real margins. Fought for Obamacare, which was a Republican Heritage Foundation plan. That's what it was. It was the plan of the right-wing Heritage Foundation think tank. That's why Mitt Romney was the one who implemented Obamacare, or Romneycare at the time, in Massachusetts before anybody else had. This is who we have now. And people want to fearmonger me about Trump? You want to fearmonger me? Nah. You show me presidents who gonna do stuff like this again, I will vote for them. I don't care what they got behind their name. You show me presidents who are gonna be what LBJ was. And they're gonna take millions of people out of poverty, who are gonna fight to put money in these communities and Job Corps and training for all these young people. But no, our presidents are Zionists. They got to send money to Israel. As I did the story a few months ago, Biden just flew a bunch of illegal immigrants in the country. I think it was 300,000 of them. So now they can come here and, I don't know, replace us, be used by the military to fight more endless wars around the country. Dick Durbin already said basically what they're bringing all these immigrants in here for, because the military can't meet its quotas. And so they're going to allow these people to come in here, these illegals to come in here, with the purpose of putting them in the military and sending them to fight America's endless wars, because Americans have finally wisened up on some level and refuse to go fight over there in the Middle East, or I guess the new front will probably be in Eastern Europe somewhere when we're fighting Russia, when that finally happens. But it's always important to remember, don't say I'm always being negative about our political system. No, this is my standard right here. This is what I expect. I expect people who are going to do this. I expect people who are going to, if you're going to get my vote, I got to believe you're going to do stuff like this. This is the standard.